A very warm welcome to all the guests, dignitaries from Amity and other universities from all over the country, members of research groups, research scholars to today's webinar. I wish to acknowledge the presence of advisor, Amity School of Communication, Colonel R.K. Dargan, and co-head Dr. Pallavi, who are there as part of the attendees, and my esteemed faculty colleagues. This again is a very unique opportunity as a webinar because we have alumni from all over the country, the world who are joining in for this webinar along with our current students. So a very warm welcome to all the young, the dynamic, the aspirational student community who has joined us today. I take this opportunity to introduce the institution which is hosting the webinar. This webinar is being hosted by Amity School of Communication, Noida. We are one of the largest media institutions in the country with a student base of about 1,600 students every year. We are a premier institution when it comes to media training, and it's been our effort to engage and create conversations which are around the ecosystem of the media industry itself. It is also a befitting opportunity to recognize the visionary leadership of our higher management. During these trying times, we have ensured that the learning continues, the knowledge graph of students is expanded through the online mode. And this has happened due to the conviction of our dynamic Chancellor, Dr. Atul Chauhan, the patronage of our beloved Vice Chancellor Ma'am, Dr. Balvinder Shukla Ma'am, and the entire vision of the founder, Dr. Ashok Chauhan, has been forwarded to its maximum during these times. So we are very grateful for that support. As you're all aware, the topic of the discussion today is the Internal Complaints Committee, and we have a very valuable and illustrious guest, Asiya Sherwani. A very warm welcome, Asiya. Asiya is an organizational ethics, diversity, inclusion, workplace culture, and interpersonal effectiveness advisor who partners with educational institutions, professional colleges, non-profit and social sector organizations, hospitals, as well as media companies to design and implement policies, practices, and systems which promote recognition, parity, and security of the underrepresented. She has a master's degree in the social sciences and has been serving various POSH and gender inclusion committees as investigations as presiding officer, advisor, mediator, facilitator, and external member. Asiya has substantial experience in workplace ethics, interpersonal dynamics, and behavioral change. She has a good understanding of how power is experienced and challenged in everyday workplace situations. This understanding helps her to design interventions to interrogate, challenge, and change unhealthy power equations and toxic subcultures in workplaces or educational institutions. She has designed emotionally intelligent policies and practices for institutions and is advisor and external member on several ICCs. As we all know, the Internal Complaints Committee, or the ICCs, are formed as part of the mandate of the 2013 Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal Act. And more commonly, it is known as the POSH Act. We will also have the privilege of the presence of the Vice Chancellor Ma'am during this webinar. And as and when Ma'am joins, we will ask her to give her remarks towards the end. We have structured this webinar in a particular fashion. 1 hour is too less a time to explain a complex intervention and to kind of explain the entire environment. All the attendees will be glad to know that we requested you to fill a registration form. And I must compliment and share my appreciation to Asiya that she has been through each and every comment on that form, and whatever will be presented today takes cognizance of those questions. So there is going to be a format to this webinar. We have requested Asiya to take a 15-minute presentation explaining firstly what the ICC is, its role and responsibilities, some important timelines, And secondly, take us through how the 2013 Act defines sexual harassment and share some examples from her rich experience with interacting with the media industry. And then we'll engage, I would like to engage with her on a few questions. We're also privileged to have the presence of an alumni member on the panel. So we will engage in a conversation and then some questions. In the meanwhile, we request you to post your questions in the Q&A link that you see on the webinar. We'll try to incorporate them as much as we can. And since the time is limited, we would like to focus this webinar more on the ICC. This discussion has happened over the last 1 week on daily basis. So we really hope that this session allows you to really introspect and have a better understanding of the Internal Complaints Committee. So I request Asiya to begin the session. And as you can notice, we already have a trigger warning. Please do read it before we begin the session. Asiya, over to you. And thank you so much for this opportunity to interact with you and to listen to your views. We are extremely grateful.
Most welcome, Gauri. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to everyone at Amity and to all the participants. Thank you for registering. I absolutely love the questions you have asked and the comments you have made. And to the best of my ability, I'm going to try and address them. So Dr. Chakravarti has asked me to first look at, what is the ICC. And before we do that, let's look at the constitutional framework in our country. Let's jump in. Slide, Piyashi. In the constitutional framework, what we have, the preamble to the Constitution of India pledges to secure for all citizens equality of status and of opportunity. So you can see on the slide, there's a mention of Article 14, 15, 16, and 17. Piyashi, if you could change the slide. So Article 14 talks about the right to equality before law. Article 15, as we all know, due to a recent film about it, prohibits discrimination on the grounds of religion, caste, race, sex, place of birth, etc. Article 16 is about affirmative action, actually. It's about enabling representation of any marginalized class of citizens, and it could be a particular gender as well. If we look at Article 15, very quickly I want to bring in a concept here of substantive equality. Our Constitution believes in a substantive equality, which means that we can take measures in favor of women or any other segment which has faced any historical disadvantage. So it empowers the state to take special measures for them. So in our Constitution, equality is not equal to sameness. Equality is not about being identical with everyone. Equality is about giving everyone representation and giving everyone dignity and a fair chance. Article 19 is another important one that I want to bring to your notice. It's about freedom. All women in this country have freedom to pursue any occupation, trade, business, profession of their choice. And they are entitled to a safe work environment and a safe educational environment. Article 21 is very interesting. We won't be able to delve in it for very long because of paucity of time, but I just wanted to bring it to your notice. Article 21 is about freedom and specifically about dignity, which includes the right to livelihood. So every man, woman, or person of any gender has the right to work in a dignified environment, has a right to have self-fulfillment, has the right to feel safe and to feel that I am not being demeaned and insulted here, or my gender is not being demeaned or insulted here, right? Relating dignity to a sense of selfhood is really important. It's something for us to really think about. So we also have directive principles of state policy. I'm sure you remember class 9, class 10 civics, right? So directive principles of state policy are not enforceable, but they work in tandem with your fundamental rights. And our directive principles also talk about social, economic, political justice, about adequate means of livelihood, about, very interestingly, equal pay for equal work. Right? That's a very, very important aspect. So what I want to tell you here really is that every employer, it is an obligation on every employer of any sort of workplace to implement the 2013 Act, not just in letter and in spirit. And according to our constitution, harassment, sexual harassment of women is a wrong. It's something that should not be happening. So the issue of sexual harassment at workplace actually attracts many kinds of laws: constitutional law, labor or employment law, civil law, service law, criminal law. And all these laws, though distinct, there is an interrelationship between them. And today, as Dr. Chakravarti said, we will be focusing on 2013 Act, the 2013 POSH Act, and more specifically in a mechanism highlighted within that act, which is the ICC, or the Internal Complaints Committee. We could move on to the next slide, please. So what is the Internal Complaints Committee? It's an executive body which is formed in an organization to prevent and redress complaints about or complaints on sexual harassment at the workplace. It's mandatory for every kind of organization to form an ICC if they have more than 10 employees. It has to be constituted at all administrative and geographical units. So you can't have just one. If you have offices and if you have if you're spread across the country, then you have to have many ICCs. So what is the guidance on an ICC? It has to be headed by a woman, a presiding officer who belongs to that particular organization, and it has to have other members who are sensitive to gender, who have some experience in conflict resolution and in handling tricky situations, who have some experience with leadership, let's say that. And most importantly, an external member who has, who could be representing an NGO and who has experience specifically with workplace sexual harassment, right? Because workplace sexual harassment has its own rhythm and has its own procedures and plays out in particular ways. So experience with specific or let me not say workplace, organizational harassment, which includes educational institutions as well. One of you who's registered mentioned that what do we do, that in our university, the presiding officer is a very patriarchal person. So they've followed the law and they've formulated the committee according to the guidelines, but we have somebody who just doesn't listen. I've had students of various colleges get in touch with me for workshops, and they say, ma'am, could you please first talk to the presiding officer of our POSH committee? I said, sure, I'd love to talk to her before, I come in and do a training. And then the students are guiding me that, ma'am, please be very careful. She's, allergic to certain words. I said, okay. And I'm like ready to take down notes that what are these words, because I must be mindful. And I do want to have a good rapport and a good connect with the presiding officer. So please don't say the word Me Too. She's very angry about Me Too. Please don't say the word feminism. She hates feminists. Please don't talk about the Pinjara Tod movement, because that really annoys her. Please don't talk about gender justice, that annoys her. So it's worrying that what kind of a person have we put as a presiding officer? And let me not blame her. I've noticed many presiding officers begin with a lot of motivation and with a lot of courage and with a lot of desire to really do this work properly, but then the system just just demotivates them completely by not letting them do what we want to, what they want to, or how they would, like to take the work forward. So yes, forming, not only forming a committee as a checklist item, but by really looking into what kind of members you have, what kind of training you've given to them, what kind of empowerment you've given to them, that is absolutely critical. Maybe have the next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the powers of the ICC? So I have, I always have a copy of the law with me. So the ICC is a quasi-judicial body. It has a lot of powers. It has the powers of a civil court, which means it can summon people, it can enforce attendance, it can ask for data, it can ask for evidence, it can ask for any material that it needs to conduct the inquiry. The ICC has to come up with a final decision after the investigation. The ICC has the power to come up with disciplinary action, which could, one of you has asked that what kind of action can an ICC take? Other than termination, which is one of the most severe actions that the ICC can take, it can also take actions like a compensatory payment to the complainant. If the respondent has been proven guilty, we can deduct from the respondent's pay and pay the complainant, because now there's an understanding in the law that sexual harassment has a cost attached to it, right? So when you get sexually harassed, especially over a period of time, you are more likely to fall sick. You're more likely to need medical help. You are more likely to need counseling. So there is a cost. There's a very strong cost attached to sexual harassment. And this particular law empowers the ICC to compensate the complainant for that sort of emotional distress which she may have gone through. We can move on. Yeah, now this is a really good slide. Most of us, when we think of ICC, we think of redressal, that the ICC should only jump into action when a complaint comes in. But it is also the ICC's responsibility to make sure that they take a lot of preventive steps. So the ICC is not only meant for redressal, it is also meant for prevention and prohibition. So the ICC is in charge of making sure that there's a policy in place, there's a code of conduct in place. There are educational posters displayed all over the campus, all over the organization, all over the office. There are interactive workshops held, right? They can take measures to reduce and remove conditions which make sexual harassment more likely in the workplace, right? So it is very important for us to understand that it is not only redressal, it is not just only handling complaints and conducting an investigation and following through on that, but the ICC has a lot of responsibilities which are actually preventive in nature. In fact, there's been an amendment to the law in 2016. Even the name of this body is no longer ICC, it is now IC. The most correct term to use is IC. I continue to use ICC because people are more familiar with that term and they understand it better. But actually, we should be using the word IC, which is Internal Committee. It's very strategic that they have removed the word complaints. And what they're trying to tell you is that it's the starting point for a committee to move into action is not a complaint, even without a complaint coming in. The ICC, or rather the IC, or maybe a better word is a POSH committee. So the POSH committee can actually start taking action much before a complaint, or even in situations where there is no complaint. We shouldn't just be complaint focused. Let's move on. Some really important timelines, and this is how we are different from a court, which perhaps doesn't have these timelines. So a complaint under the POSH Act should reach the ICC or the IC in written within 90 days, within 3 months of the incident. If there are a series of incidents, as is often the case with sexual harassment, it's not one incident, it's several. When the last, not the first, when the last incident happened, 90 days from that. The ICC is empowered to extend it by another 90 days if it finds the reasons viable, if it finds the reasons valid, right? Now, the investigation has to, in its entirety, be completed within 90 days of having received the complaint in written. And if the complainant is struggling to write the complaint, the ICC members can provide support to the complainant in writing the complaint. So it's very easy to say, oh, somebody came to me with a verbal complaint, but she never followed up, and she never gave it in written, so I don't need to do anything. That's a very shoddy excuse, because if somebody has come to you, document what they've told you, and you can always offer support. As long as you're not leading them and you're not filling them with ideas, you're not telling them what to write, but you are faithfully writing what they're telling you. Providing help to a complainant in writing a complaint is something that's actually mentioned in the law. Right? And within 90 days of that, the investigation is to be completed. Complete investigation means that there should be a report of the investigation, which needs to be handed over to both the complainant and the respondent, as well as the employer. The ICC has conducted this inquiry, and now it will hand over the report to all the major stakeholders and all the people involved. Moreover, whatever actions the ICC has recommended have to be implemented within 60 days of handing over that report. It's a pretty tough, tight, unambiguous, kind of timeline here. Let's come to the second part, and there's a trigger warning in front of you, because now we are going to be talking about what is sexual harassment. There's a lot of confusion about what sexual harassment is. So let's look at how the law defines sexual harassment. So you will be seeing 5 things on the slide in front of you, and I want you to do a quick read of that, and then I'll try giving you examples, specifically from media industry. Gauri asked me to focus on media. So, Dr. Piyashi, could we have the 5 things that that define what sexual harassment is? So I'll start speaking, and the slide will soon be in front of you. So physical contact and advances, right? So what are physical contact and advances? It could mean any inappropriate affectionate gestures, trying to forcibly hug someone, touch someone, any unsolicited physical contact, right? Standing too close to a person in an intimate and in an intimate way, which is making the other person uncomfortable. Even things like blocking the exit. So you walked into some senior person's cabin, and now he's kind of latched the door, and there is a big mahogany, whatever, statue this side, and there's something else this side, and there's one free side which he's blocked with his hand, and now you're kind of trapped in a space. So physical advances and contact is not only about touch, but also, how should I put it? I think you get it, but constricting somebody in a very small physical space. Demand or request for sexual favors. All these requests for dates, sexual favors, trying to constantly get a person to meet you outside office hours, outside the workplace, many times, and I've seen this example from actually every industry, telling someone that there's a team meeting, let's meet at this pub or this restaurant, and then this person goes there and she realizes that there's no one else, there's just this one person, so you tricked someone, or you misled someone into, meeting you out of office hours.
In fact, Asiya, some of our alumni, they are in constant touch with mentors. And, even when they get into the industry, we do get calls like this. So I'm sure a lot of our mentors are relating to what you are saying. And then they want to call back the institution and just talk to their teacher on, how they felt.
Absolutely. So all these are your rights. And it's very important for all of us to know our rights. There have been a lot of women, men, people of every gender who've put in a lot of work to get this law in place. We won't have the time to talk about Bhavri Devi. We won't have the time to talk about Vishaka guidelines here, but please read about these things in your own time. A lot of people have put in a lot to reach this stage and, have this law. 17 years after Vishaka guidelines, this law, got enacted. For 17 long years, there were people who did not give up. The laws don't, we tend to look up to, we tend to be in awe of law and judiciary. But every good gender just law that has been created has actually been a response to people like you and me persisting, for many, many years. So please be very, very mindful. This has come to us after a lot of effort. This is very precious. Right? So sexually colored remarks, all that uncomfortable double meaning talk, comments about clothing and body shaming women. I mean, I've had cases where people have overheard people talk about, oh, she's so bloody fat that I wouldn't even, dash her if somebody paid me 1 lakh rupees. You're talking like this about a colleague who works with you, right? I mean, you shouldn't be talking like this about anybody. Talking about anatomy, it includes ageism, suitability of marriage. So giving advice to women that you're 35, you're not married, one should be married by 24, I think, and one should have their first child by 27, and one should have their second child before 30. I mean, it's clear that women don't want this kind of advice anymore. So, we may be thinking, it may be well-intentioned, I'm not doubting the intention, but or I'm not always doubting the intention, sometimes I am, but these are not needed, these are unwelcome. Any verbal innuendo, discussing sex life. So sometimes it's not even asking personal questions or talking about the other person and asking her about her boyfriends, but going on talking about how great your own sexual life is. Right? I do this, and I can do this more times than men half my age. And so talking about your own sexual strength, vigor, whatever. I mean, all that is sexual harassment. Right? Showing porn, any sexually explicit material, text, cartoons, jokes, trying to get another person to talk about sex, maybe a sex scene in a film, send nude pictures, ask for nude pictures, unwelcome. I mean, you can see an important word there, unwelcome. If two people are consensually engaging in this, in this kind of interaction, that is not sexual harassment. However, if consensually I have sent photographs, intimate photographs to someone, but that person starts sharing them with others, that still is something which is on the wrong side of law for sure. So I may have shared something with you, but I may have given you permission to see it, but I may not want you to share it with 100 other people. Right? The last point is really interesting here, right? Any other unwelcome, physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature. So staring, winking, leering, those suggestive, those looks, those hostile looks, any gender-based insults on women can't do this and women are not good at that, women can't write code, women are not good at technical work. So typically, in the film and media industry, we see that. We have examples where students have told me that in a particular film school, a professor says things like this, and oh, you're so pretty looking. Why do you want to, why do you want to do a technical course? You can act. Right? Professors joking about casting couch, that ye to karna hi padega. You might as well start practicing here, because once you get there, you'll have to do this in any case. This is sexual harassment too. Even, talking about such things humorously is sexual harassment, is highly objectionable.
And Asiya, we had a webinar on the women cinematographers, and we couldn't touch on these aspects, but it was very evident that women who get into technical fields do listen to a lot of these remarks in their environment.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention jokes, because when you're talking about so sometimes very casually jokes are shared which will have a lot of innuendo to them and may make you feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yes. So a joke should be fun for everyone, right? It should be funny. So I'm not saying stop joking. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying please joke. Humor is very important. I mean, I can't imagine a life without humor, right? But it has to be humor that is laced with judgment and with an awareness of what is going on around us, right? Okay, another wonderful thing about this law, and by now I'm sure you've gathered that I'm a big fan of this law, even though it has some problematic parts to it, which we will hopefully fix along the way through amendments. But it lists out the circumstances of sexual harassment, right? So now if you look at the first two, they are, they're what is called, those of you who know some legal language, quid pro quo, which is this for that. And give me this, and in return, you will get that. Right? Now, it may be explicit. People are very explicit that I want to have a physical relationship with you. I want to massage you, and in return, you will get a 3-film contract. Right? And sometimes, or more often, it's implied. It's all this sweet jalebi talk, like, kuch paane ke liye kuch khona hota hai. And beautiful words which have been so corrupted that now they're kind of scary to hear. I get palpitation when I hear these words. Words like cooperate, adjust, right? So, is she cooperative? Is like a secret code question on, is she ready to do? Is she ready to, have sex with the director or with, whoever? Right. So the first two are really about these sort of things, and now we can keep discussing: do they have a choice? Do they not have a choice? Women who have declined and decided not to go ahead with those kind of demands, what happened to them? Did they get any work? I mean, that's something that we really have to examine. What is the system around it? So there's a contract lying at the table, and then you're very casually talking about doing something, and now the person can see that, there is a linkage. If I don't comply here, this contract is not going to be signed. So you push people into a corner. And often these people who we are pushing into a corner are people who, who are fairly young, at a fairly early stage of their career, right? They are desperate for work because there's an environment of job insecurity. Right? So when you put all this together and look at things like choice, but she still had a choice, right? So, I mean, we have to, yes, she did exercise some sort of choice for sure, But I think we have to really look at this in with a more empathetic eye, right? Um, and also there are enough examples of people getting very, very vindictive. So it's not good to give examples which are too close to home. So I'm not going to take any, I'm not going to use any Indian examples, but let's go to Harvey Weinstein. So it is that you will never make it. So there was threatening if people didn't comply. What you will, I will see to it that you never get work, right? Not only you, your spouse, your partner, your boyfriend, I will make sure that they lose all their work as well, right? So the first two are about that. The second two, the last two are kind of interesting. They're about not individual incidents, but generally creating an intimidative and offensive work environment where people feel demeaned, where people feel, especially women feel humiliated because there may be a lot of temper tantrums at office, there may be yelling, there may be rampant sexism, women may be judged by these very unattainable standards of beauty. So people have told me that in newsrooms, women who anchor shows or present shows are told things like, "Oh, ab teri double chin dikhne lagi hai. You're not that good looking anymore." There are people who comment about, "My God, her forearms are too fat. That looks ugly." I mean, we don't have any of these standards for men. I mean, look at what they look like. So here we're talking about a human being. We're not talking about a Barbie doll, right? Lips should be thinner, get this fixed, should have hair extensions. And this is only growing. I don't remember this being so awful in the 70s when I was growing up. These unrealistic, unattainable standards of beauty are getting worse by the day. And this also is a form of sexual harassment and gender-based harassment. Commenting on somebody's body after she's come back to work after delivering a child.
Yeah.
Right? One of the persons who's registered for this seminar mentioned that this is, as it is, I'm suffering from postpartum depression. And then I come back to work and everybody, and this is not only men, mind you, right? Yeah. So somebody talked about patriarchal women, and that's a very relevant point. It's not about, this is really not about men versus women at all. This, this is something that people of all genders are guilty of. So these are, I mean, I think it's so beautifully described, the circumstances, around, these are the circumstances around sexual harassment. So Gauri, that's my, bit about slides. So now over to you and your questions, and I hope whatever I said made sense.
Yeah, thank you, Asiya. I think in a very condensed form, you presented the law to us. And in fact, being somebody who's researched in, I did a representation of women in cinema. So one does kind of touch base on the POSH Act. I wanted to ask you, do you think this law is revolutionary in its sense? Is there, in your opinion, is it going to create a change? Is it a catalyst? What is your view on that?
I think it definitely is a very significant advance in definitional framework. I mean, look at this lovely comprehensive definition of sexual harassment. That is a huge advance. In addition to this, how it defines workplace. So workplace, of course, it includes any public, private sector organization, entertainment, IT, ITES, retail, for-profit, not-for-profit. But even within that, it defines, it could be office, cafeteria, storeroom, elevator, and even any place where you go to in the course of your work. So if it's an office party that I go to, right? So now, let's look at media. Let's look at, let's say, journalists. So you go to field work, right? So that is your workplace. Anything that happens there is, is eligible under this law as sexual harassment. It also specifies that the mode of transportation. So if I'm going with a colleague in a Ola, Uber cab, in an auto, in a bus, in a train, in an airplane, if we are going for in the course of work, because of work somewhere together, that is also workplace. Now in current lockdown situation, I mean, we don't have to improvise this law to include home. The law already in 2013 mentioned that even home. So if you're going for whatever costume trials as part of your film industry to, an actor's home, or going for a script narration somewhere, right? All that is workplace because you're going there for work. So the person tells you, oh, I'm going to be working out in the gym, and while I'm doing that, please read out your script. That is workplace. The gym is the workplace, as far as this law is concerned. Employee. The employee is defined as anyone, could be regular, could be temporary, could be ad hoc, could be either directly employed or indirectly employed. So which means all your agents, contractors, agency people. In the world of journalists, that could mean freelance journalists, your speakers, sources, informers, whatever else we have. All of them are employees according to this law. So that's one revolutionary thing about this law. And I'll just mention one more very quickly, which I find wonderful, which is the guidance that this law gives you on impact versus intent.
Impact.
So our law is obsessed with proof and evidence, but this law talks about impact. So even if the alleged offender says, this was not my intention. So the guidance the law gives you that if there is a conflict between impact and intent, so impact on the receiver, on the complainant, and intent of the person who has been accused, you will give more importance to the impact. So intent is not as important as impact. So what is this law telling you? Focus on the harm caused. Focus on the impact. Focus on the consequences that this is having on an individual. And this is also very interestingly moving us away from a tendency that all of us, including women, have, which is victim blaming. You see, traditionally, sexual harassment is thought of as a result of something because of the woman. Because there's something wrong in her mental makeup. That is why sexual harassment happens. Either she's too cold, she's irrational, she's hysterical, she's oversensitive. So it's her fault that she is feeling bad about all these propositions that are being made. Can't she take a compliment? Right? So what this law is telling you is, no, stop blaming the victim. Focus on the person who is causing the harm, and it places the responsibility of the harassment on the perpetrator rather than on the person. And this is, I think, this is revolutionary. I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with me. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. There is the guidance in this law is revolutionary.
In fact, as you talk, now I understand why you put that trigger warning. Asiya, as you narrate things, I'm sure a lot of us associate it, especially, as somebody who's worked in the media industry, you go back to incidences where you would have seen, I mean, maybe one has experienced those references, but at that point was not aware of what it could imply. But right, you're right about the impact versus intent.
Yeah.
The impact, in terms of damage was done.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. This is a visionary statement. I must also ask you that, now it's been 2013, we are in 2020. 7 years have passed by. It seems that the law also has this ability to evolve. Like you said, there are a lot of interventions that have happened over the years. But it is also a fact that a lot of institutions may not have, a functional ICC or IC at the moment. So your quick comments on that.
Gauri, I mean, that's such a relevant question. The ICC is an alternative mechanism of justice. in a way, it is created because the traditional legal systems have mostly remained, I mean, what's the word I should use, unconcerned or indifferent towards, the psychological impact of sexual harassment on women. So it is being created as an alternative mechanism. It is being created to focus on closure, to focus on, bringing justice closer to home, bringing justice into your organization. Employers and ICC members are equipped, they are empowered to carry out these investigations, to carry out interventions. There is no need to go to a court. There is no need to have a lawyer, right? What this law is telling you is take accountability, form good, credible ICC, train people, use a different philosophy to look at sexual harassment. It doesn't necessarily have to get adversarial, right? You can do this. You can listen to the respondent's point of view. You have to listen. There's something called audi alterum partem, which means hear the other side. You have to very respectfully listen to the point of view of the respondent, of the person who's been accused. He, along with the complainant and along with the ICC members, sit on the table and thrash it out and carve a way forward. I think this is what the ICC was meant to be. There's no need to get stuck in legalistic dodges and stratagems, and to get stuck in all these loops. The whole tarikh pe tarikh thing. There's no need. But what happens is that when we are told that you have powers of a civil court, we suddenly feel empowered, which is a good thing. But we feel that now we have to reproduce what the court does. So what will we do? We'll create these fancy flow charts of if a complaint comes, is it this? Did it happen 3 to 5 days ago? Did it happen 6 to 9 days ago? Did it involve touch? Was the touch? I mean, we just get unnecessarily procedural about it. And I think these are just delaying tactics, right? So you are absolutely right. We have this wonderful, admirable law, which is not only just lofty and philosophical, but very implementable, very, very doable. But we don't form ICCs, or when we form it, we use it as a checklist item. Okay, ICC made, fill it up with people, don't empower them. People who have been made part of ICCs feel that it's a punishment. When I'm called in organizations to train ICC members, it takes me half a day to explain to them that this is not a punishment. This is a very powerful place that you are in, and you can really do a lot of very good work. This is a wonderful opportunity. This is your opportunity to make the world a better place. Please grab it. Right? But they are so disinterested because of the way that it has, the way that they have been briefed about it, or the way that they have been treated. So, and people are thrilled when there are no complaints. The other day someone told me, Adam, we've had the ICC for 4 years and we've not got a single complaint. So, there's no sexual harassment in our organization. That's absolutely wrong. All that means is they have no faith in your ICC, right? Or it means that sexual harassment has got so normalized in your environment that people are not even recognizing it as sexual harassment anymore. Or it means that they're scared of you. They're scared of retaliation. They're scared of the consequences of making a complaint. Or it means apathy. I can't be bothered. I just come here, do my thing, go through the motions, take my class, go back. I don't have any emotional investment or involvement over here. So something which is meant to be used, if it is not used, it will become unusable. I mean, think of, we all buy this fancy exercise equipment, right? You buy a treadmill and you don't use it. Soon you will be hanging your clothes on it, right? This is what we end up doing. Right? This ICC is similar. You create it and then you never use it. It is going to become defunct. Usage is what makes something stronger. Having an ICC on your website or on your policy document and putting a tick that हाँ बन गई ICC, कहीं से पकड़ के ले आए हम 5 लोग, that is not work. That is not real work. The real work is to have a functioning, credible, trustworthy ICC that is focusing not only on redressal, but is also taking action on its own. It's making the environment, the work environment.
Asiya, very strong words. And in fact, I'll take this moment now. We want to inform all our attendees that we've actually invited an alumni, and she's joined all the way from Bangalore to be part of this discussion. Pushkala is known to everyone. Pushkala works for a very premier journalistic institution. But today, Pushkala is here as alumni, somebody who's seen her peers go through, the initial hiccups of entering the industry. Pushkala, I would like you to maybe pose a question to Asiya from your point of view, from your stance in terms of age and career. And we'd be very happy if you could just come on board and be visible and ask the question. And welcome anyway, and thank you so much for coming on board.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am. It's quite a privilege to be part of this really, really important discussion. Asim, ma'am, thank you so much for your insights on this. And while you're talking about how the ICC doesn't just have the power to provide redressal, but it's also a responsibility on their part to create a very safe environment for anybody who's there. But what are the kind of challenges that could come in their way to do that? You might be really willing to, reach out to people. You might really want to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure to, come to you with complaints. But how do you make sure that that kind of an environment is created?
Thank you, Pushkala. That's a very important question. I mean, we can't do much work if you're not aware of the challenges and barriers, and if we don't have a plan to overcome them. So I think one of the biggest barriers that I really face is actually our mindset and our conditioning. Right? That's the biggest barrier, and I think that's a barrier for any social justice work that has to happen, everywhere. So this whole thinking of boys will be boys, right? I mean, it's some sort of I don't know what to call it, a gender fatalism, some sort of a deterministic or, whatever it's called, attitude. I mean, we tend to think that it's a part of a man's DNA that a boy will be a boy. And very soon it turns into a command. It turns into a prediction that boys will be boys. And as a result of which, even boys who don't want to be like that end up becoming like that because it's sort of an expectation from society to chase girls and to behave in this obnoxious manner. So if you're not doing it, your whole boys club will be goading you, encouraging you, forcing you to do it. Even your women friends will be making fun of you. So it's not just men, it's everybody who will sort of get you to become something like that, right? To become this horrible, obnoxious person, to live up to this expectation. So what I would say is this boys will be boys is not a natural inclination. It is a flawed construction of masculinity, which the system keeps nurturing this. And this thinking is inside all of our heads. As an ICC member, I have to constantly fight it because when I'm looking at cases and I see this behavior, somewhere even I think, okay, but after all, he is a boy and boys, and then I have to correct myself. I mean, I teach people not to think like that. This is exactly how I am thinking right now, right? So that's one thing. Second, which I already mentioned, that sexual harassment is the fault of a woman. That's another mindset that we have. I think the third barrier is the quality of thinking in the ICC. Their level of thinking has to improve. They have to be more approachable. Management and leaders have to see emotional safety of employees and students as their responsibility, right? They have to be alert towards red flags. They have to know what an unhealthy work environment or work culture looks like. So if you're creating this culture of one-upmanship, of this unhealthy competition, that is going to form a very fertile ground for sexual harassment.
Absolutely.
You see, sexual harassment is not about an act of an individual. There is a fertile ground for it. So cultures where there is hero worship and followership, right? There's this one guy and only he can do the most wonderful talk shows. Only he can get you all the TRPs. He's kind of above the law. No rules apply to him. He can do whatever he likes. So one guy made this brilliant sepia-toned film.
He has all the network.
And now he's a guest lecturer in your college. Now he can say whatever. He can say what's crazy. He can say, oh, it's just like that. You know, he comes with so much positive. So we should accept it. Look at the good in him. Look at how intelligent he is. So thinking that only if this one actor acts in this film can be a success. It can't be a success without him. Only there's one writer, and you see this across industries. So please don't take it like it's only your industry which is diseased, right? Hospitals, this one great neurosurgeon, right? He can do whatever. He's above the law. You know, we just have to tolerate any kind of tantrumy, mood swing, obnoxious behavior from him. And you know, in this sort of environment, there's also likely to be a lot of gender imbalances. Right? If you look closely, this is where there will be rampant everyday sexism, right? Where we are talking about women in a particular way, where we are completely objectifying them. Women from the newsroom have anonymously and confidentially told me that we feel like a piece of meat the way we are talked about. You know, we are given feedback by male colleagues that, you know, your legs should look smoother. They're going to show your skirt should ride up in this way when the camera focuses there. What is this? You know, how have we allowed ourselves to become this, right? And we talked about constructions of masculinity. There's also a construction of femininity, right? Which is where women are expected to be pleasing, they're expected to figure, they're expected to, you know, take things in their stride. The other day we were investigating a case where there was this 45-year-old, very predatory man who had really harassed this young 23-year-old for an 18-month period. And, you know, the guidance to her, which some of the IC members were giving was, you know, you should be maturer. You're expecting a 23-year-old to be more mature than a 45-year-old? Right? How can that be? Right? So when will one gender get mature? I mean, how old do they have to become for us to consider them grown up? Right? That's the question.
Sorry, I'm also the bad timekeeper, and I wanted Priyashi to ask a question, but I'll keep it for later. There are some students who have written, and we are acknowledging their participation and asking of questions. Asiya, there's a student, Alina Andres, she's from Forensic Science, and my colleague, Anki Mukherjee. Both have kind of talked about the timelines. You know, Alina says a very important thing. She's saying many victims of abuse and harassment stay quiet in fear of judgment and retribution.
Yeah.
In such cases, how will ICC handle the situation if the timeline is for 90 days from incidents?
Yeah. So, as I said, if the ICC finds reasons viable, they can extend it to another 90 days. So which means it's 3 months plus 3 months. So it becomes 6 months. And yes, that is an issue with not only this law, but many other laws, that there is a time period. And, you know, we are in the midst of huge sweeping change. And now I think with the awareness that we have gathered on the long-term impact that abuse has on people, and now we are in a better state to understand the reasons why it may take somebody 5 years, 6 years, 10 years to complain. Maybe this law will in times to come be revised. Moreover, and more importantly, the law tells you it's 3 months plus 3 months, but your organization's policy can kind of, in its own service rules or code of conduct, extend that. So, you know, just the other day I was designing a policy with the CEO of our organization, and he says, I want to give unlimited time for somebody. I want an ex-employee to be able to come back to me 5 years, 5 years later. So I think it is people who can, you know, the law gives you the bare minimum. It gives you, what is it, LCM, lowest common, whatever, denominator.
Just the edifice, probably just the edifice.
It just gives you a sort of a framework that this is the bare minimum, you should be doing, and then you can build on it. You can add to it. The POSH Act has to be seen complementary, has to be seen in relationship with other guidelines and rules and other laws.
And the vision of the institution itself. It has to incorporate a gender neutral.
But I do quickly want to say something, and please don't misunderstand that I'm victim blaming here. I'm most certainly not. The sooner we complain, the better. Instead of delaying complaining, fight for making sure that your complaint is kept confidential, that your IC is credible, that you understand that retaliation is also punishable, and you make sure that you know that you have to be protected. It is the duty of the Internal Complaint Committee to protect any complainant from retaliation post the closure of the investigation. Right? You cannot retaliate. A person who has complained cannot face any adverse consequences as a result of complaint. Right? So know this law and use it, because you see, the longer we take, the harder it becomes to get closure. And remember one more thing, there's another very valid reason for complaining fast, because if the offender is a serial offender, your not complaining will have such a huge negative impact on so many other people.
Yes.
So think of it. If I am an offensive, predatory, bullying person, and I start doing these things when I'm 18 years old or 20 years old or 25 years old, and I go unchecked and I work in an organization till I'm 60 years old, in those many number of years, how many lives would I ruin?
Yes.
So don't think of your complaint as just about yourself. That's the advice that I would give to younger women. Don't think of it only that this is about me, and this is, when I will be ready, I will complain. Of course, that's true, and I fully understand it, and I'm fully empathetic to that. But think about the impact that it might have on other women if you don't think.
Thank you, Asiya. I'll just run through the other questions. Juhi Ahmed is saying, please share details of the Vishaka guidelines. Juhi, they are in the public domain. Please do refer to them. Sri Lakshmi is talking about memes. And Sri Lakshmi, a joke and a meme are the same thing. So we are not picking your question. Hassan Shah is talking about Kabir Singh. Hassan, I'll invite you to attend one of my classes on gender and cinema. This is another forum. Annie Joseph is talking about patriarchy is not created by any sex, but is created by the society. Yes, Annie, we agree with you. Bhavya talks about egalitarianism. Bhavya, again, you need to attend the class. I will reach to you beyond this. Subarna says, if working in any firm and the work is very important, then anybody... Okay, Subarna, I'm sorry, but it has to be framed correctly. I'm moving to the next one. You can reframe and send it again. I'm very happy, Asiya, that a lot of men are asking the questions. Abhay Jain is saying, external member is not kept in ground, in practice and in spirit. Then keeping some member from other employees, from other group. Is there a possibility that you can have an external member and that person is independent? Is the
external member should be independent. The external member should not be part of your organization. It should be somebody who's handled sexual harassment cases in various other industries and places, has a good grip and understanding of gender justice. The person doesn't need to be a lawyer, but should have knowledge, working knowledge of the various laws that may come into play while thinking, while arriving at disciplinary action and while investigating the case. So yes, external member, the idea is that it should be a neutral person, and most people don't have an external member. Again, this whole Indian thinking of ghar ki baat ghar ke andar rakho,
Very
let's
true.
not let this go out. You don't want to do a good job, right? You don't want to have justice there, and you don't want an outsider to know that. So only very brave organizations will have an external member who is a person who is known to speak the truth, who is a courageous person, and who is a kind of a fearless person who's not scared of whatever seniority and things like that.
Asia, a very interesting question from Colonel Vasco, and he's saying, is the use of social media, to explicit sexual favors or make promise of preferential treatment in employment, is it covered by the law? What is the law for physical contact by virtual means, or a chat, let's say, with sexual content, including a picture?
Oh,
Very
absolutely, absolutely. Half our time as IC members goes in looking at sexually explicit WhatsApp exchanges, right? So, I mean, by now I don't know how many thousands have gone through, right, as evidence. Yes, very much. So, a lot of sexual harassment in today's times happens digitally, and that's something that we have to understand and that we have to recognize. And I see members like me who are of a certain age where we don't know so much about, sexting and things. We have to actually educate ourselves on, what is Tinder, what kind of conversations are happening. I mean, what are dick pics? I mean, these are things that that we have to get a good understanding of, and these are things which come up again and again.
I will request also Piyashi and Pushkala to switch on their cameras. We are closing to the end. Divya has, my colleague Divya has asked, what does a woman do if the members of the IC are themselves indulging in harassment?
Oh my God.
Critical
oh my
question,
God.
Divya.
So I need your help here to answer that question. Yeah. So, well, there is a provision in the law that if the complainant is uncomfortable with a particular IC member, she can say that I would not like this person included in my inquiry. And that's why it is important to have many, many IC members. The law clearly says that there's a minimum quorum of 3. At least 3 people have to be there in an inquiry. And the presiding officer has to be one of these 3 people. So if there is a problem with the presiding officer, then yes, there has to be a written appeal sent to whoever, the vice chancellor, vice principal, whoever the head of that organization.
Somebody, higher in management than the person himself.
Yes, and then I think for that particular case, one can replace the presiding officer. And by the way, in the law, there is that if any of the IC members have any sexual harassment charges against them or any other inquiry, or if they have, not been confidential, if they've breached confidentiality, they can actually be removed, and they should actually be removed. And every 3 years, the IC should change so that there's fresh blood, fresh input. And this is not there in the law, but my advice would be to have a very multi-generational IC, have people of all ages, have a couple of men in it as well, have people of multiple sexuality, multiple life stages, single, divorced, married. It is very important.
And Asiya, we know of this case, you and me, because we were connected to it in a certain way, that in the IC, there was somebody who was related to the perpetuator.
Yeah.
This is again a very delicate space. So Divya, even that happens and that has to be addressed. Gufran, you're asking about, this constant questioning, just like, when a rape victim approaches a legal court, she's questioned on the incident again and again. So, even in ICC, that impact that people have, constantly you're being asked of the incident. And when you said that it affects the person's health, so how should an ICC approach that? Gufran, a very nice question. I must compliment you.
Yeah. Thanks, Gufran, for that question. That's very nice. Yeah, that is precisely why we have these alternative mechanisms. so that we don't make the same mistakes that are made in places which are largely callous or unsympathetic towards women. So this is the exact knowledge and the sensitivity and the empathy that a ICC is supposed to bring in. And empathy not only for the complainant, even for the respondent. What he has done may be wrong, but he is a human being and he has to be treated with respect too, and we have to fully listen to him and understand where he's coming from. Right? So what I love about my work as an ICC member is that it gives me the chance to really explore something which is a field which is kind of developing. It's called restorative justice or restorative processes, where in a non-adversarial setting, you bring everyone to the table and you get closure. So even when you go to the court, do women get closure? Do they feel safe? Even if they won the case, I've talked to several women who may have won a legal case, but they're still terrified. They're still scared. They're scared of the person that he'll come and do something to them, right? Because there's no remorse, there's no apology. There is no counseling of the respondent involved. You know, in 70-80% of the cases, talking to the accused really helps. You know, so I have a problem with even this word zero tolerance, though I know it's well-intentioned. But when we say zero tolerance, it really scares the men that anything we do, you know, we will suffer, and they get very scared. And you cannot do this kind of work if anybody is scared. People of no gender should be scared. Everybody has the right to feel safe, to feel secure. Everybody has the right to not have to constantly look over their shoulder. Everybody has the right to not have to invent stories. Sir, mera picha chhod do, mere paas boyfriend hai. Women have told me stories where they've had to lie to professors that, sir, please don't message me. They have to invent a boyfriend when they don't have one, just to get somebody off their back. And even then the reply is, don't worry, he doesn't have to know. So
Asiya, 25 years ago, I invented a boyfriend. I must share this with you. Thank you for saying that. So I must acknowledge the questions of Shubhangi, Pratham, but I want to close the question, Piyashi, with Kunzang, because Kunzang, and I will answer it myself because it's important. Kunzang is talking about how this awareness can be built into education curriculum. Kunzang, you'll be happy to know that these webinar series that we did, and in fact, when I approached Asiya for it, the UGC had set a mandate where UGC wants conversations on gender bias and gender awareness. And it's not just because they're looking at educational institutions at all. They're looking at the larger canvas of professional arena. So you people, all of you are going to be would-be leaders. If today you heard Asiya well, why is Asiya here, spending her 1.5 hours with us? Her intent, her passion, takes us here. She's come on the webinar because she wants that if at least the ripple will happen, the change will happen. So Kunzang, even the open elective, gender and cinema and gender are intended for all this. There are other open electives in the university, which are about, creating an environment where we talk about it. So thank you. I must acknowledge the contribution of Piyashi. Piyashi has been my tag team member. She's a younger colleague. I'm very happy that she was with me. And Piyashi, I'd like you to formally, really apologies, the question couldn't come, Piyashi. But I will like to invite you to give the vote of thanks. And then we'd like to close the session. We are nearing time of closing.
Thank you, ma'am, for this opportunity. And on behalf of the organizing committee of this webinar, I take the opportunity to propose the vote of thanks. At the onset, a very, very heartfelt gratitude to our founder president, Dr. Ashok K. Chauhan, for his constant blessing and support in guiding us. I would also like to thank our chancellor, Dr. Atul Chauhan, our honorable vice chancellor, Professor Dr. Balvinder Shukla, for their constant support and guidance in any endeavor that we as a department undertake. I would like to thank Ms. Asiya Sherwani for a very, very insightful session. Thank you, ma'am. I would also like to thank Dr. Gauri Chakravarti, who is our joint acting head and also the moderator of this session, for conducting this session and taking us through seamlessly. I would like to thank Pushkala, who is our alumni and who's been on the panel. Thank you, Pushkala, for coming along, and it's good to see you as well. And I would also like to thank our other alumni who have been part of this session as participants. We may have not been able to acknowledge everybody, but we recognize your presence and thank you very much. I would also like to thank Professor Colonel R.K. Dargan, Advisor, ASCO, Joint Acting Head, Dr. Pallavi Majumdar of ASCO, who have been constant support in all our undertakings. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank all the faculty members and students of our department who are the supporting pillars. I would like to then thank all the participants of this webinar, without whom this webinar would not have been in place. Thank you for registering and thank you for all the important questions. Though we have not been able to take up everything, but we are surely hoping that we have started a dialogue. Also, we would be leaving our job incomplete if we do not thank Dr. Poonam Gaur, Mr. Gaurav Chhabra, Mr. Manjeet, Mr. Nitin and Captain Divya Sharma, who have also helped us in very many ways in successfully conducting this webinar and the previous webinar on cinematographers collectives. If I'm missing out anybody's name, my apologies, and I would like to thank everybody